Okay, this is chapter 14, Dark Spirits. Dillard drove his cruiser up to the general's compound and stopped. Sat there with his engine idling, staring at the open gate while his wipers shoved the slush back and forth across his windshield. He couldn't remember that gate ever being left open. There were no fresh tracks coming or going in the snow. "This ain't right," he said under his breath. He'd tried to call the general last night and most of the day, at least a dozen times now. It was getting near dark and still no answer. He'd even tried Chet. Nothing. Dillard liked to run a tight ship, needed to know what was going on at all times, needed to be in control, and he sure as shit didn't feel in control right now. Not with all the insanity that had been going on around Good Hope the last couple of days. He pulled into the compound and up behind Jesse's truck. There were still plenty of vehicles, and again, judging by the snow, not a one of them had been moved since last night. He didn't like it, not one bit, because unless they were having a slumber party, they shouldn't still be here. The bay doors were all down, but the side door hung open. Then open, he could see a good dusting of snow piled up in the entranceway. Dillard killed the engine. There'd be no calling in backup, not on this one. Last thing he needed was Noel nosing about, raising too many questions. No, he was on his own. Dillard rubbed his eyes. His head still hurt. He hadn't made it to bed until 6 that morning, running from one call to the next. When he finally did get to bed, he'd hardly slept, worrying over why the general hadn't returned any of his calls. Getting too old for this shit. He pulled the coffee cup out of the holder. The coffee was cold and stale, but he drank it anyway, then got out of the cruiser and sloshed his way up to the door. He pushed through the entranceway and hit the hall light. Tracks, at least 3 sets of brownish footprints, led out of the bay. He knew it was blood. He was working hard to convince himself it was Jesse's blood, that it had to be, because he didn't want to consider the alternative. He tugged out his pistol, pushed off the safety, and followed the tracks to the steel door leading into the bay. He set his hand on the knob and gave it a turn, pushed it inward. It was dim, the only light coming from the red Christmas bulbs, but it was enough to see that men lying around in heaps were not sleeping. He snatched his flashlight from his belt, clicked it on, and braced it snug beneath his revolver, keeping the gun trained on the beam as he searched the room. His heart drummed. Fuck, he whispered, swallowed, forced himself to hold steady. He'd seen plenty of death in his 30 years on the force. It wasn't the blood that bothered him. It was the savagery of the carnage before him. These weren't typical gang-style murders. These men had been ripped to pieces, arms, legs, and guts strewn everywhere. Pressed his nose into the crook of his arm, all while trying to look everywhere at once. He found no sign of a living soul, heard nothing, and his eyes adjusted to the gloom. He began to relax a notch. He guessed by the congealed blood that this carnage had taken place many hours ago, convinced himself that whoever had done this must be long gone. He scanned each body, searching for the general, peering into faces, some so badly mangled he couldn't recognize them. He didn't find the general, nor Jesse, for that matter, but he did find the chair Jesse must have been taped to, saw the sheer duct tape. Someone had cut him loose. Someone had got him out of here. How'd you do it, Jesse? How the hell did you pull this off? His hands were shaking. Things were getting out of his control. Hell, they were out of his control. Dillard forced himself to take several deep breaths. A light still shone from the upper floor in the general's office. Dillard walked quickly across the bay and up the stairs. The door stood open. He peered in. This is wrong. Everything about this is wrong. Nothing appeared touched. No rifled drawers. No damage to the safe. And he found no sign of the general either. Dillard decided they'd probably taken the man with them. Extortion, perhaps, or maybe just for the pleasure of torturing him to death. Tough titties for him, Dillard thought. Got my own problems. He glanced back down at the bodies. Like, how the hell am I ever going to cover this clusterfuck? Again, he felt his heart speed up. This pain in his chest. Wait, I'm overthinking it. Maybe I don't need to cover anything up. Might just be the blessing I've been praying for. He nodded. Solve a lot of problems, especially one big one by the name of Samson Ulysses Boggs. Don't have to worry about his erratic behavior no more, about him blowing everything and taking me down with him, and since every dumb shit he had working for him is laying down there with their guts torn out, there ain't a soul left needing to be shut up. All I gotta do now is, no. He shook his head. Jesse? There's that goddamn Jesse. And Jesse will talk. Oh boy, Jesse will talk. Tell them everything he knows about me and then some. Of course, that's assuming they bring him in alive. What are the chances of that? Dillard didn't know how, but he didn't like loose ends. No, Dillard didn't know, but he didn't like loose ends. He liked things all tidied up, just like his color-coordinated Tupperware bowls. Bowls on the shelf, lids in the lid drawer. I gotta find that boy. Got to get to him before someone else does. Gotta shut him up for good. Dillard headed out, made it to the bottom of the stairs, and stopped, his face clouded. There are 2 other complications, aren't there? If they brought Jesse in alive and Linda and Abigail collaborated his story, hell, even if they didn't bring Jesse in, Linda could hang him. With the general gone, she might just come forward on her own. If they called in them internal affairs boys, he'd sure have a lot of explaining to do. He just couldn't afford to have anyone raising suspicions, period. Can't just make Linda and Abigail disappear. Not that easy. No, he'd managed to get rid of one wife without raising a stink, but having 2 women mysteriously disappear from his life wouldn't sit well with folks. Add a little girl to that, and someone was bound to catch on. Dillard's eyes traced back and forth across all the carnage. Fuck. His chest began to tighten again. He found Ash staring at him, staring on and on without blinking, his mouth torn into something resembling a smile. Not a mocking smile, but the smile of someone who knows the answer to a riddle before you do. What? What is... Dillard's mouth clamped shut. He nodded slowly. He got it, and it was a doozy. All at once he found himself smiling back. So, Ash, correct me if I'm wrong, but last I heard was that Jesse's running around with a bunch of murderous maniacs. If, say, Linda and Abigail turned up dead, victims of a savage home invasion, people would have no problem believing that, would they? What do you say, Ash? Makes perfect sense, don't you think? An entangled husband, full of jealous rage. Dillard nodded. Then all I gotta do is lead them to you, and you're dead. Oh, and your dead pal's here. Folks will make the connection real fast. Why, it'll all fit together like a pretty puzzle. No one would suspect my hand in any of it. Nope, they'd be too busy feeling sorry for me. He slipped on his gloves and headed back down to the shop. He found a plastic bag and gathered a roll of duct tape, a knife, a few tools, and left, wiping down the doorknobs, careful not to smear his boot tracks as he went, to clean the blood from the soles in the slush. He planned on coming back, to be the one to call it in, because it would be best for him to be the one that discovered the crime scene, the easiest way to explain any evidence he might have left behind. But it never hurt to be too careful, to keep things tidy, just as his Tupperware. He opened the door on Jesse's truck, popped the glove compartment, and added a few of Jesse's things to the sack, some evidence to leave behind for the forensics team. He climbed back into his cruiser, got the engine running, sat there until the window defrosted, then drove off, heading for home.